Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Andrea Wojnicki, and she is a executive communication coach, a podcaster, something called talk.com. She does corporate workshops. She's a keynote speaker. She's a columnist. She's a personal brand expert. She's a coach of ambitious executives to communicate with confidence and credibility. She's got a great background at Harvard Business School and in communication skills training. And tonight we're going to talk about how to introduce yourself. Sounds like a simple thing, but she's got a three-part framework and a story about why it's so critically important. Andrea Wojnicki, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. This is the second time we've done this, and I'm so happy to be here with you again. And I can't wait to share this framework with your listeners.
So why is introducing yourself difficult, and why does one need a framework?
Oh, gosh. So many of my clients complain to me that they're tired of not feeling confident about how they introduce themselves, including very senior, successful people who will say, of the many things that I could say about myself, I don't know what to say. I don't want to be the person that takes up too much airtime, but I want to make sure that what I say is the things that I should be saying. We've all experienced, whether you're young, old, experienced, inexperienced, wherever you are in your career trajectory, even in personal contexts, when someone says, well, let's go around the table or around the screen and introduce ourselves, and your heart starts pounding. And frankly, mine still does. And then I say, oh, it's okay. I've got a framework for this. But there's a reason why we feel this anxiety, right?
Why?
We've all heard the cliche that first impressions matter.
Yep.
And your self-introduction is the most direct way that you have to communicate your brand or to reinforce your brand to the people that you're introducing yourself to. So the stakes are high. Frankly, the stakes are high. But this is an opportunity for you to share things about yourself that you want the rest of the world to know. So
you don't just say, I'm Brian Crombie, I'm COO. You don't do that?
So it depends on the context. Sometimes it's just name and title. Absolutely. So, but more often than not, it's let's go around the table and we're introducing ourselves to a new client, or there's a new team member that's joined, or a couple new team members, right? And so let's go around and briefly introduce ourselves. And everyone, your mind starts racing, right? And then you realize you're thinking, how long should I talk? Should I say something about my personal life? Do they care how long I've worked at the firm? And then you realize you're not listening to one word that anyone said. So this is the anxiety that happens. Wow. And so I said, I'm
kind of defeatist if you're not actually listening to other people's answers and you're thinking about your own.
Exactly. So if there was a quiz on people's names, you'd fail. And whenever I tell this, and when I share this with an audience, everyone always starts laughing because they're like, I don't know about you, but I've caught myself in this scenario where I'm like, that person just introduced themselves. I have no idea what their name is.
I got to tell you, if I could apologize for interrupting, but I was at a wedding this summer, and what they said is it was the rehearsal dinner. No, it wasn't. Yeah, there was the rehearsal dinner. And they went around, there was a pretty big crowd, and they said, everyone has to introduce themselves and say something unique and intriguing about yourself that other people wouldn't know, which was kind of fun. But the problem was everyone was doing exactly what you're saying, is they were thinking about what the heck am I going to say that's unique and intriguing about myself that other people don't know, rather than listening to all the other answers.
That's true. That's true. I never thought of that in that context, because that's a pretty common one for an icebreaker, right? Like, tell us something that nobody would ever guess about you. And then you're like, oh, should I tell them this or should I tell them that? Or so I came up with this 3-point self-introduction framework. And, you mentioned earlier that I have a podcast. So I'm now up to episode number 172. This self-introduction framework is episode number 86 of the Talk About Talk podcast. And it started out immediately getting the most downloads, and it still is the most downloaded episode of all 172 episodes. And soon after it was released, I started getting emails and even text messages from friends who listen, and they said, oh my God, I tried it. It's amazing. And then a friend of mine told me that she was watching the news, like the morning news, and a coach came on and taught my framework without giving me credit for it. And when you learn what the framework is, I realize we're doing this big reveal here. When you learn what the framework is, you're going to realize it's not rocket science, but it is something that she obviously heard me say it, right? And I thought that this isn't cool. I'm going to write this up. I'm going to write it up as an article, and I'm going to send it to Harvard Business Review. So I did that. That was August of 2022. And it shot up in terms of downloads. And in the calendar year 2023, it was in the top 3 most downloaded articles at harvardbusinessreview.org. So this framework gets traction. Do you want to hear what
traction
it is?
and work. Sounds good. Go for it. Tell us what the framework is.
So it's 3 steps. The first step is exactly what you said. It's present tense. It's, hi, my name is, and I am. So in a professional context, you just say what your title and your role is. If you've done some work on your personal brand, or if there's something else you want to share about yourself, but this is where you are establishing who you are and what you do. Okay, so present tense. That's the way most people start their self-introductions, right? Step 2 is past tense. So you go from present to back to the past. And this is where you establish credibility. So in a professional context, right, you could say what you previously did. You could talk about recent wins that your team had. If it's in a personal context, say you're introducing yourself to a new neighbor. You told me that you just moved, and you're out on the street and someone comes over and they said, oh, I saw the for sale sign's gone. You're welcome to the neighborhood. And the person might say, my name is, I live over there, right? Present tense. And then past tense is, I've been living here for 15 years. Anything you want to know about the place, right? So it's where you establish credibility or add relevant detail, usually about the past. And in a professional context, this is your opportunity, like I said, to establish credibility. That's where most people will end, right? If you think about it, it's like, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. This is what I do. Previously, I did this and this and this. And then they kind of trail off, like, and that's me. The icing on the cake is step 3, and it's future oriented. So here's where you can take advantage of this research insight that when you demonstrate enthusiasm, things are more likely to go your way. So there's all this research that I've combed through. I first heard about it from a negotiations expert that I interviewed for my podcast, and she was talking about how this emotion of enthusiasm makes things turn out the way you want. If you're negotiating, the negotiation is more likely to go your way, and people are more likely to be willing to negotiate with you in the future. Enthusiasm also works in sales contexts, in job interviews, in teaching and coaching. Like it's like this magic thing that a lot of people shy away from enthusiasm because maybe they think it's unprofessional or something, but the research shows that it's really powerful. So in your self-introduction, end it with a positive, future-oriented statement with enthusiasm. So for example, you could say, and I'm really excited to get to know all of you better. Or I'm really excited to work on this project with all of you, and we're all going to end up getting promoted and rocking it, right? Like, so it's saying something about the people that you're meeting, but in the future, and how enthusiastic you are. So
positive, future-oriented, and enthusiastic.
Exactly. So you go present, past, future. It's not chronological. This is the most common mistake that people make, is they think it's past, present, future. I'm like, no. You're not reading your biography. You start with who you are, then you go back into the past, establish credibility, and then you go in the future and you express your enthusiasm. Bam.
Sounds fantastic. And tell us a little bit about this research on enthusiasm. You know, I've heard about confidence before. I've heard about grit or resilience before, but enthusiasm is a new one.
Well, I would say enthusiasm is a little bit different from those other things that you're mentioning. By the way, those are very important elements of not necessarily communication as much as just what your mindset is. The enthusiasm is really about expressing an emotion, right? And this positive kind of energy, enthusiastic emotion. Interestingly, in a professional context, a lot of people, especially women, believe that if they express enthusiasm too much, people are going to think they're a ditz, right? So I always say, I'm not talking about putting 20 exclamation marks at the end of every sentence and little smiley emojis and giggling, and giving everyone a high five all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. You're still being professional, but there's certainly nothing wrong. And in fact, the research shows that it can end up being an advantage or a benefit to you if you express enthusiasm. Like, I mean, just think about it. If you were interviewing 2 people, I've been in this situation before where I've been interviewing 2 people who have different backgrounds, but they really are both clearly very capable of doing the job. The person that gets the job offer is the one that's demonstrating enthusiasm, right? It's a very powerful differentiator.
I've been in a situation where, a comment was made to me by someone. Oh, they're too enthusiastic. They're too eager. They want it too badly. There must be something wrong.
Ooh, I don't know what I mean. Unless they were shifting over into that side of seeming like flighty, or I don't know what the word is, right? Like unprofessional or something. Or like they were begging for the job or the position or whatever it is. There is a difference there. But presumably somebody who is appropriate for the position and is professionally demonstrating enthusiasm. The research says that things will turn out. So this research that this negotiations expert, her name is Dr. Tatiana Astray, she actually had trained people to code different expressions that people were communicating when they were negotiating, right? And she had this whole list, and then it was like, then she correlated which emotions were more consistently attributed to the winner of the negotiation, or the willingness for the other negotiator to enter into a new negotiation with them, et cetera. And surprising to her, enthusiasm was the one that really stood out.
Enthusiasm in a negotiation. That sounds interesting. So somehow showing that you're enthusiastic to what? To come to resolution, to settle, to whatever gaps?
Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of this one research paper, right? But I believe that it was about the process, and yes, coming to a resolution that's going to be ideal for both of us. Yeah.
So present, past, future. So I'm Brian Crombie. I'm a radio host with Saga 960. I've been a radio host for 5 years. I've got over 3,000 interviews, but I'm really excited tonight to have Andrea Wojnicki telling us a little bit about how to introduce yourself, about personal branding, and about communications. How's that?
Bravo, you nailed it. Do you see how that works?
So we're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes. And I'm really excited that we're going to come back with Andrea Wojnicki talking more about personal communications, branding, and how to introduce yourself. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm a radio host at Saga 960. I've been hosting this radio show for 5 years. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Andrea Wojnicki before, one of 3,000 different people I've had the pleasure of interviewing. But she is a dynamic communicator, and I'm excited about what she's got to tell us today about how to introduce yourself, about personal branding, about communication. So how was that?
Bam, nailed it.
Present, past, future. And be enthusiastic about the future. So, Andrea, you mentioned when we first started talking that your introduction is the best way to convey your personal brand. What's a personal brand? I thought you were trying to convey who you are, not a brand.
Oh, okay. So the first part of the question is, your self-introduction is the most direct way to reinforce your personal brand, because it is your words about you, from you. Right? So that just makes sense. There are many, many other ways of communicating your brand. The second part of your question is about what is a brand, or what is your personal brand? Is that right?
Yeah, versus you. Like, how is a personal brand different than just introducing you? So I guess, what is a personal brand?
A personal brand is, to use Jeff Bezos, he's the ex-CEO of Amazon. He says that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So really, it's about your reputation or your identity. And so I spent a lot of time in my coaching practice. When I started coaching executives on their communication skills, I thought that all my time was going to be spent coaching them on confidence and listening and storytelling and how to deal with difficult people and negotiating, et cetera. And sure, I do cover those topics, but more and more it's been focusing on establishing your personal brand. And another way of thinking about it in a professional context, it's really about establishing your professional identity or your reputation. So as I said, Jeff Bezos says Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So I ask my clients, what do you think your boss and your boss's boss is thinking or saying about you when you're not in the room and they're talking about who to promote? That's your professional identity at work. And if it's not what you want it to be, then we can work on identifying the gap between what they're saying and thinking and what you optimally know that you are. I'm a big proponent in my coaching practice of helping everyone, personally and professionally, identify the positive and unique things about them. I call them your superpowers. So what are the things about you? Superpowers. Yeah. Yeah. So what are the things about you, Brian? What differentiates you compared to other radio hosts? Right. And so I'm not going to put you on the spot unless you want to answer that right now.
So I think, that's an interesting question. So I think number one is I do a long form interview. So I interview people for, upwards of an hour minus commercial time. And I think a lot of interviews are 5 to 10 minutes or something like that. And so that's one thing, is just the length of time. And because of that length, I really want to get to know people in a far more intimate, may not be the right word, but in a far more intimate manner. I want to get to know
personal. It's personal, right?
You can't talk for 47 minutes without getting pretty personal and fairly detailed. And because of that, you've got to get to know people a little bit more before you start the interview, because you got to know where you're going and what you're going to talk about. And I think that it's very helpful. And, you mentioned listening is one of the skills that you train people on. You've got to listen more. I think that if you're interviewing someone for just 5 or 10 minutes or 2 minutes, which is the sort of the typical news media kind of interview, you've got that one question or that, 1 or second question, and you don't really care what they say. You just want to get the answer. But if you're going to have a conversation for 47 minutes, you really have to listen to people, because otherwise it's not going to flow. It's not going to be a conversation. And so I think that that's a key. And then I try to draw something out of that because I want to make a summary at the end of the interview about what I think about the whole process. And so I think that in addition to listening, it's synthesizing it. It's trying to bring it together. And whether you do it by repeating sort of what someone says, or the way that you and I did it, which is trying to put into practice something that you recommended, which I've done or tried to do. I try to be enthusiastic. I try to be articulate, probably not as well as you would be, or you could be, or if I would be if you trained me in your communication stuff. That's probably it.
You're pretty articulate, Brian.
I say I'm too much.
Yeah, no, you had a lot of, you do have a lot of strong superpowers. I would say I've been interviewed several times, and you do create a certain rapport, but I know, and I respect this, that you're also thinking about your listeners, right? You want to keep them engaged. And I'm sensing that you are asking the questions that you personally want to know, but you also know that they would want to know from the person that you're interviewing. And this is unfortunately rare. Most of the time, to your point, interviewers have a script, right? And they're like, okay, the next question. And when I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it's like I always start laughing when I hear an interviewer ask a question, person answers it, and then they go, okay, question number 2. Or they don't even need to say that. You know that it is question number 2, right?
Because it's completely disconnected from whatever they were talking about before.
It's not a dialogue, right? You create dialogue. Yeah. Like we're doing right now.
I think that's key. And I think that's what hopefully gets people to listen and effectively participate. They can't participate directly, but think they're part of a conversation, whether it's at a dinner table or in a fireside chat or something. Because otherwise it's just a Q&A, and I don't think that's overly interesting.
Right. So our superpowers are how we add value in a way that no one else does, or that very few other people do, and it's what it basically it's about how you provide value. And I think
you've got to try to figure out how you create value, how you provide value.
That's right. So
how do you do that?
How do you figure it out?
Yeah.
So I take my clients through a process where we look at, from a blank sheet of paper, I give them prompts about what makes you stand out against other people who have your similar jobs to you. What made you stand out to your high school graduating class? what makes you stand out relative to other people in your family, right? So I have all of these prompts that I ask them, and they just ask them to write everything out. And then I also encourage them to email at least 5 other people, like very different people. I say young, old, male, female, people they've known for a long time, people they just met, just contact 5 people. And then you ask them these questions about what makes this person unique. And then we pull that all together. We can do personality tests. I have an archetype test that I take people through. And we, over time, synthesize a sheet of paper. It's an 8.5 by 11, I call it personal branding template. And we identify 13 to 15 themes about you that are positive, unique, and relevant traits about you that you might introduce, that you might mention in a self-introduction, or you might not. So you're never going to mention all 15 things. You'd sound crazy, right? If you did, but if there was a long form biography written about you, for sure, all those 15 things would be mentioned,
15
right?
positive, unique traits.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this template.
Do people actually come up with 15 positive, unique traits?
Oh, easily.
Really? Okay.
So these traits can be your personality, your values, your leadership style, your education. It can be geography. So where did you grow up? Where do you live? That's often part of people's personal brand, right? It could be your industry expertise, your functional expertise. It could be your family dynamic, right? So like, who do you live with? Or maybe you're in the sandwich generation, you're looking after your parents and you're looking after your kids, something about your family. It includes personal hobbies, sports, arts, whatever you're into, all of the things that are positive, unique, and relevant. It's basically anything where you have unique expertise or passion. And then we list all those things. And then from there, it becomes really easy to introduce yourself in any context, right? I'm really not a fan of elevator speeches, or memorizing a script about how you talk about yourself, or anything else for that matter. It's more about having this like dictionary or list of things that you can choose from depending on who you're introducing yourself to and what the context is.
Positive, unique, and relevant, and 15 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And people can actually find 15 things that are unique about them versus other people. There's got to be a lot of repetition.
So let me think of an example. Recently, I've been coaching several senior executives who, when I take them through my 12 archetypes exercise, they end up saying, yeah, I'm definitely the explorer, Andrea, and of the 12 archetypes, I'm the explorer. I say, great. Well, that's probably why you're an entrepreneur and you're, working in technology or whatever. That makes sense. And then they say that word trailblazer, really, this has been happening a lot lately. And so I push them on it. I actually tell them, a lot of people tell me they like that word. So give me an example. Tell me what you mean by it, define it, and give me a story or an example of when you were a trailblazer. And it's like, if they can easily define it and share at least a couple stories, then I'm like, okay, it belongs in your brand.
You've used the word archetype a few times. What do you mean by that?
So archetypes are universal patterns for how we think about people, about brands, about stories. We've all heard of the hero's journey, right? So we have this archetypical character. It's a universal pattern. We recognize this hero who's like, think of the Superman story, right? Like he's born, he has these challenges when he's a baby and a child, and then he whatever. There's this archetype of a story or a journey that they go on. As humans, we think of each other in terms of universal patterns, and we've done so for centuries and across cultures. So anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, all of these scientists have done research on archetypes, and they exist across culture and over time. And so it's really simple ways of describing the patterns that we think in. So for humans, there are, depending on the research that you read, probably 12 archetypes that we fall into. And I find helping my clients identify their primary and usually secondary archetype is so satisfying because when they read it, they're like, yeah, that's me, right? Like that, like I for sure I'm the jester. I always am cracking jokes when I shouldn't. I'm always trying to whatever. Or, like I said, for sure I'm the explorer. I'm always the one in the room that's like, let's try something new. Let's try something new. So it's like that and then when they see the description, they're like, wow, that's me. And they feel seen. And going through this exercise of identifying your primary and secondary archetype has a lot of benefits, right? So it can provide you with focus and direction. This is like another way of articulating what your superpower is. So once you know,
what's your archetype?
so I have two. One is magician and one is sage. So the magician archetype is someone who leads people through transformation. So I know for sure my best day at work is when I get feedback from a past client or a current client and they say, Andrea, something that you taught me changed everything. And thank you so much. And guess what just happened, right? Like I've successfully led them through transformation. I'm definitely the magician archetype. And then the sage archetype is the student, the learner, and the teacher. And they're analytical. They're supposedly analytical and wise. And yes, I'm a nerd. I love school. I would have stayed in school forever.
You and me both. I'm trying to do my DBA and finish it. I
Oh,
haven't
really?
succeeded yet. Yeah, I haven't succeeded. I'm what's it called? ABT, all but thesis or something like that. All ABD, all but
All
dissertation.
but dissertation, yeah. So my degree is actually a DBA,
What did you get your DBA in?
marketing. Not surprising, yeah,
And what
marketing.
was your research question?
My research question was about why consumers talk or don't talk about the products and services that they consume. So it was really focused on word of mouth, and it's not that I was trying to manipulate to get them to do it, but why would they talk or not talk? And so the answer is consumers share information about products and services that they've consumed when they're thinking about their expertise in that area, and they're signaling expertise to others by making recommendations. So it's all about the ego, really.
It's all about the ego. They won't make
Yeah.
a recommendation unless it's somehow helping them.
So there are many, many different motivations, and altruism definitely is a motivation. People want to help, right? It's not like, but they're not mutually exclusive. Chances are, when someone tells you about a great new restaurant in your new neighborhood, Brian, they're signaling,
I was there.
yeah, they're signaling this is the kind of person I am, and this is the kind of restaurant I go to, right?
What's that old Yogi Berra comment about? No one goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Yes. Yeah. I hate waiting in line. There's a fantastic ice cream place that just opened down the street. And I'm like, I don't wait in line for ice cream, but someday when there's no line, I'm going to go in there.
So there's a gelato place I went to recently. Yesterday I went and it had a huge lineup. The gelato was worth the wait for. It was just spectacular.
Oh, it was.
It was. It was. So this personal brand, you've got to think of, was it 13 or 15? I can't remember. Personal, unique, relevant things about yourself.
Positive, unique, and relevant. Yeah.
Positive, unique, and relevant.
Yeah.
And that's how you figure out what your personal brand is.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the exercise that I take my clients through. I've really tipped my hand here and shared like what the process is when I do boot camps and coaching with my clients. But if someone is, interested in pursuing this on their own, take out a blank sheet of paper and ask yourself, what are the positive, unique, and relevant personality traits, values, accomplishments, and expertise and passions that I have? And then how can I say those things, when I'm introducing myself, or, and this is the whole other part of the conversation. I've created this massive list of all the different ways that we communicate our personal brand, from what's in our Zoom meeting background. I have color-coded bookshelf behind me. That's not an accident. To your voicemail greeting. When was the last time you called yourself and listened to your voicemail greeting? And does it sound like what, the positive, unique, and relevant things that you want to be communicating to the world about yourself? To, your LinkedIn profile or whatever you're doing or saying on social media, to, where you live, to who you hang out with, like all of these things reinforce your brand or signal things about you.
Really interesting. And you get this Number one, by thinking about it. Number two, by talking to someone like you about it, but also by sending messages to, you said 5 different people,
Yeah.
and asking them what they think about you.
Yeah. So really, this is another really interesting insight that I've identified by doing this with thousands of folks, is that usually after you get about 3 emails back, you think, everybody's saying the same thing. And then the fourth one, it's like, uh-oh. And then the fifth one comes and you're like, I know it's going to. So sometimes someone will say something more eloquently. And then I say, do read them all, because someone might say something in a way where you're like, yeah, that's how I want to say that thing about myself. But if you ask 5 different people from different parts of your life, what stands out about me compared to other people, right? What makes Brian, Brian? What makes Andrea, Andrea? People will, and the other thing is I tell them, I learned this the hard way. You don't want to get you don't want paragraphs back. You want point form. I always say point form is much more helpful than paragraphs. What are like 2 or 3 things that are unique about me? What is unique? What makes Brian, Brian? And then I can almost guarantee if you emailed 5 different people, Brian, they would say in slightly different words, they would come back with the same things.
Fascinating. That's interesting. Maybe we should give it a shot.
You should. Yeah.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Andrea Wojnicki, talking about personal branding, about how to introduce yourself, about archetypes that have got to be positive, relevant, and what was the third one?
Unique. PUR, positive, unique, relevant, pure.
PUR, positive, unique, and relevant. And that's how you create a personal brand for yourself. Fascinating. That's right. Andrea, before we take a break, what's the podcast you're on?
It's called Talk About Talk.
Talk About Talk with Andrea Wojnicki. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I mispronounced my guest's name. I apologize profusely about that. It's Andrea Wojnicki, who is a executive communications coach, a podcaster, a really interesting person who really tries to help people understand who they are, how to introduce themselves, what their personal brand is, how to communicate better. And we've talked about archetypes. We've talked about PUR, personal, unique, and relevant, are the things that you need to think about in regards to your personal brand, and come up with 15 different things that are personal, unique, and relevant. And we've talked, I think, about the way to introduce yourself and this threefold framework that Andrew's developed, where initially you talk about who you are in the present tense, then you talk about what you've done in the past tense, and then you talk about something very enthusiastically about what you want to achieve in the future, in the future tense. So really interesting conversation. Andrea, I wonder if we could turn to some of these questions that people have got to ask themselves, that you help them through to try to figure out a little bit more about who they are, why they're unique, what those passions are, etc.
Okay, I just want to say, if I had counted how many times you said talk about, I love it. You just kept repeating, we talked about this, we talked about that, and that's the name of my podcast. So thank you. You're reinforcing my brand. Thank you, Brian. So back to your question, what questions should we be asking ourselves?
Should we talk about?
What questions should we talk about with ourselves when we're creating our personal brand? I shared one earlier when I talked about Jeff Bezos' definition. He said, your brand is what other people think and say about you, or it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. So I ask my clients this question: what do people that you care about, could be your boss, could be your spouse, could be your friend, whatever, whoever it is, what do they think and say about you when you're not there? Right? And if you're really honest with yourself, most of the time there is, as I said, a gap between what we want and what we think we are and what we want to be versus what they might think, right? So that's where there might be some work for you.
I had an interesting professor at one point in time who said, write 2 eulogies. Write the eulogy that you think will be said about you if you died tomorrow, and write the eulogy that you would like to have said about you if you died tomorrow. And if there's a difference, that's what you got to really work on.
Ooh, Brian, I think that is an example of another really effective exercise that people could use, right? I just read an article in the New York Times about a woman who said she writes a eulogy for herself once a year. And she said, it's not morbid. It helps me reset what I'm focusing on. And I was like, yeah, that's very insightful, and it takes some discipline. But the other thing that I've noticed in my work is people are shocked at how spending a little bit of effort on this stuff gets huge traction. One of the insights that I've identified is that the irony there that exists, how we are obsessed with ourselves, right? We're self-absorbed humans. We have to be. We're self-interested. We have, in order to survive, our ancestors had to be self-interested, and we're self-interested. And in conversations, we're thinking about, what am I going to say next? We're politely trying to not interrupt, and what am I going to say next, right? And yet, we spend very little time thinking deeply about ourselves and our identity and our legacy, to your point about the eulogy, right? So I think that's very, very important to think about. So the first question is, what are people saying and thinking about you when you're not in the room, or maybe when you're dead, right? And then last week, I just released a podcast episode with Seth Godin, who I interviewed recently. And I asked him whether he thinks about his brand. He definitely has a brand, right? And I said, do you consciously think about managing your brand? And then he started talking about the definition. And he said that his definition of personal branding is, and he does spend time thinking about this, it's what people think you're going to do next. And I was like, oh, I think I like that even better, right? So Brian, what do people think you're going to do next? And maybe to be more specific, what is conceivable and what is not conceivable about what Brian's going to do next? That says a lot about your brand.
That's a tough question. I'm going to have to ask 5 people.
No. This is about you asking yourself what. So I shouldn't say no. I think you should answer it yourself before you ask other people, and then see how that compares. And the other thing that might make it easier is ask yourself what your goals are. Again, personal or professional. What are your goals and objectives? What are you hoping to do? And then compare it to the list that you generate of what is conceivable and what is not conceivable. So Seth Godin told me that he thinks deeply and consistently. He asks himself, what do people think Seth is going to do next? And then I said, or at least what's conceivable. And he said, exactly. And if there's something that I want to do that they might think is not conceivable, then I need to work on evolving my brand somehow.
That's good advice. Great advice. Okay, so those are 2 questions.
Those are 2 questions. So, and then the other questions are the ones that I would ask people in the emails, right? So what makes Brian? That's about as vague as you can be, but it's, what do you know stands out about you compared to, and then this is the other way of thinking about it in terms of time, compared to, your high school class, like I said before, maybe when you were in your first job, what was different about you compared to other people that have the same job, right? Compared to and then go across different groups of people. So for me, I had a big epiphany about my personal brand when I compared myself to all of these groups of people. And then I said, so I'm in a book club in my neighborhood with a bunch of women. There's about 12 of us, and we all have our unique quirks, right? How am I different from those women? And then I was like, oh, okay, that's part of my brand. Got it, right?
So how are you different than them?
I knew you were going to ask that. One of my friends, she's a very smart woman. She actually said to me something a couple months ago, and I was like, oh, I need to go think about that. And she said, Andrea, you just don't turn off. You don't turn off, do you? And I was like, oh, like it was a bit of a backhanded compliment, right? Like she was saying, Andrea, you have a lot of energy, but it's just like you're always revving high. You're like thinking, doing whatever. And I was like, I need to take a bit of a downer. And this is the thing, even if we go back to the archetypes, there's no one archetype that's better than an archetype. Just like in terms of our personalities, there's the positive side and the negative side. So I am an extreme extrovert, and I've got this like sense of urgency, type A, which is great in some ways, but I also need to be aware of that, not hog the mic, not, be in people's faces, like focus on listening. And I call that like personal branding 2.0. So now we've established who you are, what your strengths are, the positive, unique, and relevant things. 2.0 might be thinking about maybe what you're deficient in or what being too much of any of those things could mean for some people.
It is interesting. I was telling you about this professor that told me about doing the eulogy. He wrote a book called The Theory of Intentional Change, and it was a cycle that you had to go through, maybe comparable to the person that you mentioned in the New York Times that said write a eulogy every year. He said that you've got to be constantly rethinking it and reevaluating it and improving. Otherwise, if you stop growing, what's the future? And it was kind of interesting that it was this constant circling that you go through, cycling that you go through to try to figure out who you are, improve upon that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so that's very consistent with what I coach people on. I say there's really two main steps. It's identifying or articulating your brand. That's the step that a lot of people don't focus on enough. That's where I spend 95% of, not 95, probably 75 or 80% of the time. And then step two is the communicating, but you're not done. Like when you've established your brand, you've written down your things, it's step three is update, and it should actually be a constant cycle. And a lot of my clients will come to me and they'll be like, help, I need to change my brand. I just got promoted and I need to establish leadership here and la, 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 la. And I'm like, okay, calm down. First of all, congratulations. You're growing, you're learning, you're succeeding. Like change is good. And I said, I hope that your personal branding template will require updating at least every 6 months, at least until you retire. Like when you retire, I think you can take your foot off the gas and, maybe.
But you don't, or you won't.
Well,
because you're always on, according to your
maybe not. I'll be whatever, trying to become the pickleball champion and then the tennis champion or whatever.
I chatted with a guy just, when was it, Saturday, who's been retired for a few years, and his ambition is to become the pickleball seniors champion of Canada.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. We got to take a break though for some messages, and we're going to come back in just 2 minutes with some concluding comments with Andrea Wojnicki, who has a podcast, which is Talk About
Talk.
Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Andrea Wojnicki is my guest tonight. She's an executive communications coach. We've been talking about lots of different things, how to introduce yourself, and her 3-part framework on how to do that by thinking about what you are in the present, who you were in the past, and what you've achieved in your sort of record of successes, such that you're relevant to listen to, and you've established your reputation, I guess, and then have a positive attitude and enthusiastic attitude about the future. And people, if you've got that enthusiasm, will listen to you and want to meet you and want to interact with you far better. And it'll help you in negotiations and everything else in life, according to Andrea and an academic paper that she read. Then we talked about trying to understand who you are as a personal brand, and a couple different ways of doing that by, number one, emailing 5 different people and trying to figure out what those 5 people think about you, thinking about writing a eulogy about yourself and what's the difference in what you think might be said versus what would be said. And she even recommended you might want to think about doing that on an annual basis and improving constantly through your life. And then we talked about writing down 15. It was PUR, personal, unique, and relevant things. No, positive, unique, relevant things about yourself that help you identify your superpowers and your brand. Andrea,
very well put, Brian. Very well put.
What if some of those things that make you unique are not positive?
Oh, I love this question. Very often, that thing that you are hiding, that fault, maybe it's your wicked sense of humor, or maybe it's this is a question that I get from a lot of clients who are, immigrants and who might have an accent, and they're like, I'm tired of being known as the immigrant, and I'm afraid of my accent is sending these negative signals. Or maybe it's, some aspect of your personality. These quirks, these bugs, very often are in fact not bugs, they're features. So I have this saying, unique is better than better. Stop trying to be the best version that you can be that according to other people, and think about the number one strategic principle of personal branding, which is identifying the P U R, Brian, the most important one for sure is you. It's unique. Unique is better than better. I've coached, partners at big consulting firms who have admitted to me that they try to quiet their sense of humor because they think people aren't going to think it's professional. And then when I told them, like, you're quieting this voice inside you that actually is a superpower that you can use to help, alleviate some of the most, dire, serious conversations. And when people need a pick me up, you're that person. So you are smart enough to not be telling inappropriate jokes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you leaning into your sense of humor as part of, not all of, but part of your identity and your superpower and the value that you add. And the same thing with several people that have asked me publicly and privately about how to evolve their personal brand from immigrant to, professional. And there was this one woman that raised her hand very bravely in a live Q&A, and she said, "You can tell by my accent that I'm an immigrant from India, but I'm also a lawyer and I want to change my brand. I don't want to be known as the immigrant anymore." And I said, "Okay, you're in New York. You immigrated from India. Your accent is not a liability. I can understand your English clearly. Your accent is an asset. Why? Because it's reinforcing your global experience. And here's your new brand. You're going to tell people, 'Hi, my name is,' you're going to share your name, and then you're going to say, 'I am a corporate lawyer in Manhattan with global experience,' period." And then your accent is basically evidence of this global experience. So the challenge, I just shared these two examples. The challenge for everyone now is to think about that thing that you try to hide a little bit, and how can you share it in a way that's authentic and true, but positive, right? And then you can take the air out of any negativity associated with whatever that trait is and change it from what you're perceiving as a bug to a feature of your brand.
Unique is better than better. I love it.
Unique
That's
is better than
fantastic.
better.
Andrea
Mhm.
Wojnicki, thank you so much for joining us. Remind us of the name of the podcast.
The podcast is called Talk About Talk, and I would love it if you gave it a listen.
For sure, I will, and hopefully some of our listeners will as well. Thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed our conversation today. We'll have to have you back again. And thank you all for joining us on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on social media and YouTube, etc., and podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thank you, Andrea. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully we can do it again soon.